Watch more programs like this on cable and stream with PCN Select. Subscribe at PCNTV.com.
My name is Henry Jackson Hunt, Brigadier General of Volunteers. I am the Chief of Artillery of the Army of the Potomac. I'm a West Point graduate, class of 1839, career artillery officer. In September of 1862, just days before the Battle of Antietam, I was offered the position of Chief of Artillery by General George McClellan. I took that position on the stipulation that I be given tactical authority over the Army's artillery, and I held that position until the end of the war, when Lee surrendered at Appomattox in April of 1865. On the third day at Gettysburg, in the afternoon of July the 3rd, the largest cannonade ever unleashed on the North American continent took place. Knowing that I had fewer than 80 guns in position on Cemetery Ridge, the Confederate artillery stretched in an unbroken line of probably 130 pieces of artillery along Seminary Ridge, opposite our position on Cemetery Ridge. Although I knew we had fewer than 80 pieces of artillery within range to respond to their bombardment, I had issued orders to all of my battery commanders when the rebels started in not to respond for 15 minutes in order to conserve ammunition. There had been some speculation in the headquarters area as to what this cannonade meant. It was either a cover for a retreat or a prelude to an attack. Seeing their unbroken mass of artillery opposite ours, I knew that we weren't facing a retreat by the enemy. We were coming under assault. You don't position 130 pieces of artillery or more in order to cover a retreat. I rode south along the lines, issuing orders to every battery commander to conserve ammunition. We had three major gun lines, what you would call a brace of artillery. A brace of artillery is a line of batteries. A battery of artillery in the Union Army is typically 6 guns, some of them 4 guns, but most of them consisted of 6 guns. So a brace of artillery would be a line of batteries. There were 3 major braces of artillery. To the north, along Ziegler's Grove, Cemetery Hill, you had the guns of Major Thomas Osborne, who was the 1st Corps Artillery Chief. In the 2nd brace of guns, under the command of Captain John Hazard, who was the 2nd Corps Artillery Chief. The southernmost brace of guns, the 3rd one farther to the south, you had the batteries of the Reserve Artillery. Those were under the command of Colonel Freeman McGilvery, who was actually a sailor from Massachusetts, but one of the most gifted artillerists that I ever saw. The Rebs started in with everything they had. It was almost a loud, thunderous crash. The bombardment began. Most of my battery officers heeded my orders not to respond for 15 minutes. Some of the more eager battery commanders started in a little early, but I had issued orders for each of them to fire deliberately and for effect, meaning you concentrate your fire on one battery, destroy it or drive it from the field, whichever comes first, and then move on to the next. I didn't want my men wasting ammunition in what I believe to be unproductive counter-battery fire, which is simply shooting at them because they're shooting at us. The air was very thick that day. It was very humid. The smoke was not clearing over the target. I wanted each battery commander to ascertain as much damage as he could upon the enemy before continuing his rate of fire. We knew we were coming under assault. We had to conserve ammunition to beat back whatever number of troops the enemy was going to throw at us. General Hancock riding down his line, was trying to bolster the morale of his men. He and I had a difference of opinion in how to respond to this cannonade. The cannonade itself had gone on for about 2 hours. Again, we were not going to trade the Rebs shot for shot. We weren't sure how much damage we were inflicting upon them. Again, the smoke was slow and clearing over the target. Further to the north, I met with Major Osborne, commanding the 11th Corps guns. I met with General Oliver Otis Howard, commander of the 11th Corps, and myself. We decided to cut our rate of fire and draw the enemy in. We said, if this attack is coming, let's get it underway and we'll blow them apart in the field rather than trade them shot for shot. I issued orders along the line that our rate of fire be slackened and then cut out altogether. The idea was to deceive the enemy into thinking that they had either driven our batteries from the ridge or that we had simply run out of ordnance. The battery commanders cut their rate of fire and eventually slackened off altogether. General Hancock, on seeing this, felt that this was bad for the morale of his men, that the rebels were firing at us and we were not firing back at them. He rode south along his line, issuing that Captain Hazard, orders that Captain Hazard, his artillery chief, increase his rate of fire, thereby expending his long-range ordnance. General Hancock then rode south outside the 2nd Corps. He rode into the guns of the Artillery Reserve, commanded by Colonel McGilvery. He threatened Colonel McGilvery's battery commanders with being placed under arrest if they didn't follow his orders to resume firing. Colonel McGilvery arrives on the scene, has words with General Hancock. General Hancock threatened to place Colonel McGilvery under arrest. Colonel McGilvery stood there defiantly and told General Hancock to go to hell. As far as he was concerned, he had received his orders from the Chief of Artillery, and by God, he was going to obey them. This is what we call a conflict of command. Now, in fairness to General Hancock, how do we arrive at a conflict of command? As I stated earlier, when General McClellan appointed me Chief of Artillery, I decided that I would accept the position only on the condition that I be given tactical authority over the guns. Prior to my assuming command of the artillery, an artillery chief, his role was merely that of an advisor and an administrator. I was the first Chief of Artillery to be given tactical authority. This was honored by each successive commander of the Army of the Potomac, from McClellan all the way up through General Meade. The problem was that the agreement was verbal. There was nothing in writing stipulating exactly what authority that I had. Many in ranks considered me merely a member of General Meade's staff. Technically I was, but as Chief of Artillery, I also held the position of field officer. So there was some confusion along those lines as to exactly how much authority I had. As a result of General Hancock's orders to resume firing, the entire 2nd Corps gun line expended all of its long-range ordnance. Many of those guns, particularly the rifled guns, had a range of 1,800 yards or more. As a result of his orders, the 2nd Corps gun line fell completely silent when the rebel troops began their advance across the field to us. All they had left in their ammunition chests was short-range ordnance known as canister, which is effective only within a range of 400 yards. So the Rebs had to cross the Emmitsburg Road before the Second Corps guns could swing into action. Canister renders your canister is essentially a tin can loaded with iron balls, fired across a field at short range. Has a shotgun type effect that's to be used at mass troops inside of 400 yards or closer. The rebel flanks were being pounded into submission by Colonel McGilvery's guns on the right wing of their charge, which would be Pickett's Virginians, the left wing of their charge under Trimble and Pettigrew. Their flanks were pounded into submission, forcing each of the flanks to move towards the center. Relatively speaking, the safest place on the field for those rebel troops was right in front of the Second Corps gun lines, right in front of Captain Hazard's guns, because those guns could no longer swing into action until they crossed the Emmitsburg Road. When the troops crossed the Emmitsburg Road, then the Second Corps guns went into action. I can only say in conclusion, many of you know the story of Pickett's charge. Our line was breached at the center, but the troops were driven back by infantry reinforcements. Our line held. But I can only say in conclusion that had General Hancock not issued the orders that he had, I don't believe for a moment that those troops would have reached that wall.